nightmare started over a month ago when I heard my husband mumble. He's standing in the garden. He's looking in the window. It must have been 2 in the morning. I sighed and rubbed my eyes. You could set your watch by him. At that time, my sleep had been disturbed regularly by Daryl's sleepwalking and sleep-talking, and sometimes sleep-yelling. He'd never done anything like that before. It had just started out of the blue about 3 days prior to that night. That night, when he was whispering, mumbling while he dreamt. His voice was low and hushed. He's trying to get inside. I couldn't help but look over at the dark, curtained windows. I imagined that if I pulled the curtains aside, I'd see a ghostly hand pressed up on the window pane. The little hairs on my neck stood up. I shook my husband awake. He jolted like he'd just tripped over something, and his eyes shot open. He breathed heavily. "Was I talking again?" he asked, out of breath. Sweat beaded his forehead. "Yeah, it just keeps getting creepier." My eyes were wide as I spoke. He looked over at me, his face tired. "Was it the guy in the garden?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, you said he was trying to look through the windows." He rubbed his eyes. "I can't remember what it was all about. It's so vivid while I'm asleep, but as soon as I'm awake, it just slips away." I stroked his arm gently, trying to comfort him. "Let's try and get back to bed. We need to pick up Jacob early." He nodded and got out of bed to fetch some water and some melatonin. I drank the rest of the cold chamomile tea I'd not finished the night before. Then we went back to bed. It was about 3 in the morning when we fell back to sleep. At 7 o'clock the next morning, my alarm rang loud and shrill. I kept my eyes closed as I fumbled for it and hit the snooze button. By 7:30, we were up and on our way to the train station. Jacob was waiting for us with a large suitcase and an old leather backpack. Jacob was our nephew. He was a scrawny guy with dark brown hair and bright green eyes. Jacob had just started his final year at university and was studying zoology. He was considering veterinary school after his bachelor's degree was done and was visiting schools around the country. Daryl and I lived near a large veterinary hospital and school, so Jacob had come by to see if it was any good. His eyes had dark circles from exhaustion. His whole face seemed to droop. Nevertheless, he still gave us a small, warm smile as we pulled up. "How was the train?" I asked as he climbed into the back seat. Daryl loaded Jacob's suitcase into the trunk and got back into the driver's seat. "Delayed and uncomfortable. I was just managing to get some sleep right as I arrived." "Figures," Jacob said, his voice irritable and feeble. "Well, you can get plenty of rest at the house. It's quiet at the moment with everyone away for the holidays. The family of 4 next door is in Ecuador." We continued to chat as Daryl drove us home. Jacob mentioned he was excited to check out the school and would leave to take a tour the next day. I asked Daryl to drive him, but Jacob said he'd rather take the bus so he could get to know the area better. The day after that was Sunday, so we slept in and had breakfast food for lunch. After that, Jacob left for the bus stop. Daryl and I did some chores, and then we sat down to read. The air was peaceful and quiet. I remember it being last time I had felt relaxed, felt normal and comfortable in my own home. The day had been warm and bright, and sunbeams illuminated small motes of dust in the air. Pretty soon, Daryl and I both fell asleep on the couch, leaning against one another. Suddenly there was a loud shout, and I sat up, my eyes wide and suddenly very awake. Daryl was sitting up straight, his chest heaving with breath. That was a bad one," he panted. "What happened? Why did you shout?" I asked, my hand on my chest. I was dreaming, about that guy again, except he wasn't alone this time. This time he was with a woman. They were standing just outside. He turned to look at the window. They were throwing rock. Out of nowhere there was the deafening shatter of glass. I yelled. Daryl leapt to his feet in fright.
I glanced down at the floor. Among a pile of broken glass lay a single rock. It was small, dark, and smooth, almost perfectly round. As soon as I looked at it, I felt a cold trail of goose flesh run down my neck and arms. There was something so unnatural about that rock. It looked artificially polished. Darrell and I ran to the window, carefully avoiding the shards.
There was nothing outside save my front yard. My petunias and crane lilies waved gently in the breeze. No one was standing there. The air was thick with silence. All the neighbors were still away on holiday. Darrell and I looked at one another, our eyes searching each other's expressions for some kind of explanation. I was hoping Darrell would declare himself the mastermind of this terrifying practical joke. But no confessions came. "Must be kids playing a prank," he said as he cleaned the glass and tossed the stone into the yard. But his face was still white and his hands trembled. He wasn't quite convinced. Later that same evening, Jacob returned from his sightseeing and was thrilled. We decided not to tell Jacob about what had happened, and Darrell, being a very proficient engineer, had already replaced the window pane that afternoon. Jacob couldn't stop going on about the facilities and the local cafes. We were so happy for him. We then decided to order pizza and watch some silly rom-coms. We all went to bed at around midnight. As I lay in bed and turned off my light, I couldn't help but look over at the curtained windows momentarily. The curtains hung ruby red and still as stone. Was there someone standing outside? I shivered as I rolled over in bed and cuddled up close to my husband. I felt like I'd just closed my eyes when I was disturbed. I had turned over while half asleep and found myself suddenly alone in bed. It's always disconcerting to find yourself unexpectedly alone in the middle of the night. At first, my face still buried in a pillow, I figured Darrell was on the toilet. As I rolled over and opened my eyes, I noticed a figure standing at the foot of our bed. It was Darrell. I jumped from fright and yelped, "My God, Darrell, you frightened me!" I clutched my chest and breathed hard. "What are you doing standing there?" I asked. Darrell did not stir. His back still faced me. He seemed to be staring at the curtains in front of him. Then he spoke softly. "They're outside. They're calling." His voice was flat and vacant. He was sleep-talking again, and now he was sleepwalking. I felt my stomach fill with boiling lead. "Come back to bed," I said shakily as I slowly sat up. Something wasn't right. "They're outside. They're coming." His voice sounded slightly slurred, like he'd been drinking. Darrell took a few quick steps toward the window. I felt my heart skip a beat. I ripped the duvet off my legs, but as my feet touched the floor, there was a tremendous smash. I screamed as the window to my right shattered into 1,000 pieces. The sudden commotion made me lose my balance, and I fell on the ground hard. I felt a frigid gust howl through the broken window. "What?" I didn't get a chance to finish speaking before the window in front of Darrell exploded too. The wind that blasted through was so strong and cold it forced my eyes closed. My teeth began to chatter. How was it suddenly so cold? Darrell. The wind died down and I opened my eyes. Darrell was gone. My mind felt empty. My limbs were heavy. Confusion washed over me. "Darrell," I said again. The wind had vanished and the chill in the air had retreated completely. I slowly stood. My eyes searched the ground for signs of another rock, but there was nothing. I walked up to the closest smashed window. When I looked outside, all I saw was my garden shrouded in darkness. The half-moon was obscured by wispy clouds. The cool night air washed over my confused face. "What?" I whispered, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I suddenly heard a hoarse whisper behind me. "Auntie Valerie, what's going on?" I spun around to see the dark silhouette of Jacob standing in my bedroom doorway. I could just make out the look of worry on his face. "I'm not sure. Your uncle is missing. I'm not sure what happened. The windows, they broke.
I think I need to call the police. I hurried over to my phone. Within 15 minutes, 2 tired-looking police officers arrived and took my statement. I trembled as I spoke. I told them everything. I told them about my husband's dreams. I told them about the smashed window from the afternoon, and I also showed them the mess in my bedroom. They were sympathetic and offered to drive me to the hospital for a checkup. I declined. I just needed rest. They told me not to worry, that my husband probably hadn't gotten far, that he must have broken the windows in his sleep. When I tried to tell them there was no way my husband broke the windows, one of the cops said, "Look, people can do weird and out-of-character things while sleepwalking. We once had to go fetch some old university professor from some park in the middle of the night. He was up some tree and refused to climb down. He'd done it all in his sleep. They said they'd look around the area and let me know if they found him. Jacob gave a statement too, but he had been asleep."
A few minutes after the police left, I found myself sitting on my couch with a cup of cocoa clutched in my still shaking hands. Jacob sat near me and tried to comfort me. He got me a blanket. I was still unable to comprehend what had happened. My eyes stared into space, unblinking. Where had Daryl gone? Who were those people? I felt a lump of dread lodge itself in my stomach. What the hell had happened? A week went by. The police still had no information. Jacob postponed going home to help look after me. He was really such a sweet kid. It was late in the afternoon and I was preparing lunch. Suddenly, Jacob walked into the kitchen. "Ah, Auntie Valerie? Can I talk with you?" I stopped dicing onions and looked up at him. His expression was guilty. He was awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck with his hand. "Yes, what's up?" I said curiously, putting down the knife. He looked embarrassed. His eyes couldn't meet mine. I kinda lied to the police. And you. About what happened that night. You know, last week. When it happened. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My heart fluttered. What do you mean?" I said. He paused. It seemed to last forever. The room was so silent, I could hear my heart thump loudly in my chest. Jacob still couldn't meet my gaze as he replied, "I forgot to close my curtains that night, and something must have disturbed me in my sleep because I woke up in the middle of the night before the windows smashed. When I sat up in bed, I froze. I saw people standing outside, at least a dozen people. I couldn't see their faces, just dark shapes, their outlines. They were all in the garden. I didn't know what to do. Then suddenly I heard the windows smash and I got distracted. I looked away from my window for a second, and when I looked back..." He paused. Tears were now forming in his eyes. "I saw Uncle Daryl. He was standing right at my window. He was staring in at me. I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew it was him. Slowly he turned around and walked away. As I blinked, he vanished. That's when I got out of bed and came out to see you. I was convinced I had dreamt the whole thing. I mean, how could that be possible? I was scared the cops, that you, would think I was crazy. But now I don't think it was just my imagination. I've seen them again. Not in my dreams. I mean, I saw them outside my window. I saw them last night. I don't know what's happening. I think I should go home, but I don't want to abandon you." He was crying now. His voice was full of fear. I was shaking. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Don't worry, my boy. Everything's going to be fine. I'm sure it was just a dream. I mean, I didn't actually see anyone else myself. The police are probably right. They'll find your uncle." I gave him a big hug. "Maybe it would be a good idea for you to go home. You must miss your own bed. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. And after everything that's happened, you should go home. I'm sure your parents are anxious to see you. Let's get you sorted." Within an hour, Jacob was packed, and I drove him to the train station. We didn't speak much on the way there, and when we said goodbye, I gave him an extra tight hug. I'd never admit it to him, but I was dreading going back home alone, back to that same bed. The bedroom windows had been repaired, but I still felt a cold wind whenever I looked at them. It was 2 o'clock the next morning when my phone started ringing. Groggily, I reached over to my bedside table. I answered, my voice croaky from sleep. "Yes?" I said, sitting up. I switched on my light. They were on the train. I heard a flat, monotone voice answer. A chill rippled down my spine. "Jacob," I said softly. "They were on the train. They found me." All traces of sleep vanished from my voice. "Jacob, this isn't funny," I said angrily. I was terrified at that moment. There was a slight pause before he continued. "They're outside your house, too." "They're outside. They want to come inside." "What the hell do they want, Jacob? Are you okay?" Suddenly the phone went dead. I just sat in bed. My nerves were burning with fear. I didn't get any sleep that night. I wasn't surprised when I got a call from my sister a few hours later. Jacob had never gotten home. I told her and the police I'd dropped him off, and the security footage at the train station confirmed my story. It even showed him board the train at 6:30 that evening. He'd taken an overnight train. But the security footage from his destination showed no trace of him. Just like Daryl, he had vanished. I also hadn't told anyone about Jacob's phone call, and the police never brought it up. Had it ever happened? I decided not to tell my sister anything more than what I'd told the police. I felt a numbness in my brain and body that refused to abate. I hardly had the motivation to do anything except eat and drink for days after that. I haven't been able to leave my house for 2 weeks now. I don't open the curtains anymore. Every night I sit in my living room, the lights on. And every night since Jacob disappeared, I've heard a gentle tapping. A tapping on my living room windows. Last night I heard their voices for the first time. I heard Daryl and Jacob. They were both calling me, stretching out the vowels in my name as they spoke. "Valerie, Valerie. They want to come in, Valerie. They just want to talk. It's not so bad, Valerie." I felt completely helpless. The police were useless, of course. Whenever I called them and they showed up, the things outside would just vanish. They now told me to stop bothering them, or they'd charge me with wasting police time. And based on what happened to Jacob, running away wasn't really an option. The sun is beginning to set, and I find myself sitting once again in my living room. I've boarded up all my windows and sit on my sofa clutching a golf club in my hands. Maybe I can't stop them from getting inside, but I'd be damned if I wasn't going to put up a fight. I've also left myself a secret way out just in case, but won't write that down here. I don't want them to find it out. The sun is now completely gone. I can hear the tapping on my window. It is louder than before. My grip on the golf club tightens. The tapping has now turned into full-on knocking. Someone was banging their fists hard on the boarded windows. I've decided to write this all down so that when I suddenly disappear, people may be able to figure out what happened here. Maybe they can find Daryl or Jacob. Or me. But I figure it's likely no one will ever see me again. Perhaps it won't be so bad. At least I will be with Daryl and Jacob again soon.